As far as we know, there is only one universe. Most of it is empty. That's why we call it space. Still, there are more than 150 billion visible galaxies in our universe. Out of all of those, only spiral galaxies like ours have stars similar to our Sun. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, has 200 to 400 billion stars. Our Sun is the only known star with a solar system that can support intelligent life. Excluding single-celled life forms, like bacteria, scientists estimate there are 6.5 million species of land animals on Earth today. Another 2.2 million species live in our oceans. Many of these creatures have brains. In fact, they even have emotions. Astonishingly, out of the 8.7 million species on Earth, only one has a brain with the capacity to think about its thoughts. Homo sapiens. That's us. As humans, we have the ability to examine how we know what we know. Unfortunately, a small but powerful segment of our species is hard at work. For the last 60 years, these collaborators have systematically developed complex strategies for influencing our behavior. Their primary objective is to convince us to think the way they believe we should think. These groups are collectively known as the Thought Monopoly. In the United States today, forces are at work, subtly shaping every area of our lives. A powerful group of social engineers are programming us to adopt their version of reality.
Well, I remember when I was at Caltech, some newspaper reporters and magazine reporters came to interview a bunch of us about UFOs, flying saucers, and intelligent life on other planets. And they're basically asking us, is any of that possible? And we quite foolishly would answer, well, anything is possible. So what got published? Caltech scientists say that intelligent life on other planets is possible.
Yeah.
What we meant was, yeah, it's possible down to 80 places of the decimal.
I think a lot of people are curious about supernatural things because, I don't know, just kind of like sucks them into it and stuff.
Stephen Hawking has an imaginary set of friends called the physical laws. Okay? He thinks they're real. He talks of them as if they can do something. People of that paradigm will say, when they say nothing, they mean the quantum foam, which is far from no thing. It's a sea of energy and particles popping into and out of existence, and that's not nothing. That's something. And if it's something, it has rules.
It would make sense because nothing would be a state where nothing existed, which doesn't exist now. So it would make sense that because there's no such thing as nothing now, that nothing is unstable. So I could understand that.
There is much better, 1,000 times more evidence for evolution than there is evidence that the Earth goes around the sun.
When people say what caused the Big Bang, what came before the Big Bang, what's outside, what's beyond the observable universe, these are speculative questions. They're multi-theories that could attach to them.
Is there one you're comfortable with?
Well, the quantum genesis idea,
Yes.
whereby there are other potential quantum seeds and you have the multiverse and potentially other space-times unobservable by us and independent of our space-time. And I think that's a reasonable idea.
It is becoming increasingly difficult for the average person to separate truth from rhetoric.
Most people cannot tell what is true and what is false when reading or hearing information.
The very same chemical elements on our planet exist throughout the entire universe.
I guess most people don't know it, but we're made of star stuff. Every atom in our body was forged in the center of a star.
Recently, a reporter from National Public Radio interviewed Harvard science professor E.O. Wilson. Their conversation centered on Wilson's latest book, the creation. Here is an example of some trending rhetoric. From the interview transcript, we discover Wilson saying, "America's metaphysical differences and culture war are destroying our planet." This type of rhetoric is often presented by media professionals without rebuttal. So, let's take a closer look. Metaphysics is a type of thought that is based on abstract reasoning, transcending physical matter or the laws of nature. So, how many flavors of metaphysics are currently in conflict today? That's virtually impossible to know. Furthermore, is there a metaphysics that will mitigate Wilson's planetary destruction hypothesis? Wilson certainly believes so. Scientism is his preference.
Ian Barber, who wrote fairly extensively on the relationship between science and religion. And he pinpoints the conflict as really a difference between two philosophical starting points. And the first philosophical starting point that he points to is one that is basically a materialistic or naturalistic or a physical starting point, and he calls that scientism, and other people have used that term, and scientism is basically a philosophical commitment that states two things. The only way to knowledge is through the scientific method and through scientific inquiry. That's the first assertion. The second is the fundamental aspects of the universe are matter or matter and energy only. And so scientism actually takes the method or the processes of science and extrapolates the method into a metaphysics or a philosophical view of reality.
Now, let's examine the term culture war. The dictionary defines culture as the quality in a person or society that arises from a concern for what is regarded as excellent in arts, letters, manners, scholarly pursuits, etc. Most would agree. There are numerous cultures represented in America today. So, which ones are at war? How is Wilson's concept of culture war also responsible for destroying our planet?
I believe in karma, only because, I don't know, I just feel that sometimes when I do something good, something better comes to my life.
And I believe in heaven, and because of that is from just my religious upbringing and what I choose to believe in.
I believe that when you die, everything's going to be okay, because when you were born you had nothing to do with it, and when you do die you're going to have nothing to do with it, and it's going to be okay.
If it's like something in school, I usually trust like a teacher or someone who was taught in like about something that I need to know. Other than that, I look in books.
I believe there is a God, and I don't know, I guess I just have faith in that he's real.
I believe that space is endless because scientists have come very close to proving it.
I know that the world around me exists, and I know that because I can see it, I can reach out and I can touch it, all the physical things around me. It's my world.
I know that people that play athletics are highly motivated and highly successful individuals. I believe that because I am an athlete myself, I was an athlete, and I work with athletes on a daily basis.
I believe in deja vu. I believe this because I have deja vu experiences about once a month regularly.
Something I believe is that the line between science fiction and reality is going to begin to blur, and we're going to see those technologies improve our lives in ways that we would never know.
I believe that hard work pays off. I believe this because I've seen all my brothers and sisters work hard to be better people, better parents, be successful in their jobs.
Did the people we just saw look like warmongers to you? Hardly. Were they slandering or using hate speech? Obviously not. These are the types of people Professor Wilson marginalizes in his book. So why does Wilson use his emotionally charged label culture war to promote his book and agenda. I'm Bob Abel, Principal Investigator for Thought Monopoly. Personally, I have nothing against Professor Wilson. However, his book, The Creation, contains examples of rhetoric that many other intellectuals are also using today. With a solid background in media literacy, I can say for certain that language like this becomes buzzwords for fake news stories. Often, representatives from our universities and government agencies are also contributors of disinformation. Unfortunately, you and I are a captive audience. During the next several minutes, you will experience clarity on topics ranging from origins to destiny. Hopefully, our honest attempt to strip away rhetoric in search of truth will become your experience too.
What if the root of Wilson's alleged conflict is actually ideologically driven and therefore overlaps virtually all cultures? Just to be clear, an ideology is a collection of beliefs held by an individual, group, or society. It can be described as a set of conscious and unconscious ideas which make up one's beliefs, goals, expectations, and motivations. For example, the prevailing ideology among academia today is rooted in the philosophy known as postmodernism. According to PBS.org, postmodernism stems from a recognition that reality is not simply mirrored in human understanding of it, but rather is constructed as the mind tries to understand its own particular and personal reality. In other words, reality is unique for every individual. Thus the popularized saying, "My perception is my reality." What proposal then do intellectuals like Wilson have for an end to the culture war and harmony between metaphysical beliefs? Historically, an effective strategy of these power brokers is to marry empirically based scientism to metaphysical postmodern philosophy.
Today, under the guise of scientific supremacy and political correctness, adherents to postmodernism are compelling us to interpret reality according to their rules. Collectively, I refer to these adherents as a thought monopoly. This thought monopoly is systematically penetrating every facet of our society. It is pervasive. Utilizing our systems of education, politics, and digital media, its leaders are skillfully constructing our perceptions of truth.
There's no such thing as photographic memory.
How do we relate those two terms, truth and reality?
Yeah.
I mean, science seems to always be changing, so maybe today a doctor will say, well, if you drink too much coffee, you're likely to get cancer. And then the next day they say coffee's good for you.
Mm-hmm.
So which is true? Both can't be true.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a court of law, you have an expert in the defense and an
Sure.
expert, on the prosecution side. They can't both be right.
Yeah, great question. The connection between truth and reality. What
Right.
is that connection? Scientists want to know about reality,
right?
And so my understanding in my research dissertation was on this very question. What is the connection between truth and reality? And my understanding of this is that the connection has to do with a kind of matching or correspondence. And so let me just illustrate with an example. Take the sentence, this cup, can you see this cup?
Mhm.
Is on the table. That sentence is true, right?
Yes.
Now we could do something to the cup. For example, I could push it off the table. And by doing something to reality, we thereby change something else, namely the sentence. We make it go from true to false, from true to not true. And this suggests to me that truth really depends on reality, the way things really are, independently of how people might think reality is. You mentioned experts. People say, one expert says one thing, another says another. Who are we to believe?
Right.
It's a deep and vexing question.
Right.
But the point about truth is that the reality is independent of what we believe. So, for example, I could think that the universe has a cause, But in fact, in reality, nothing caused the universe, in which case I would be mistaken about that. And so this is why I try to keep a humble attitude, and I'm always willing to be wrong, willing to overturn my beliefs, and sort of continue this inquiry into truth by investigating reality, rather than sort of sticking with prior convictions. I want to really be willing to be mistaken.
Yeah. When it comes to truth, and it comes to the average person, I think people that are watching this right now would say, well, how do I know when I've got the truth?
Seek a correspondence between the things that you think you understand, that you think might be true, and reality. And in reality, I don't just mean what you can see or measure today, but talk to other people and see what their experiences have been. Investigate history and see what people have thought at previous times. As you address one particular item of truth, if you want to call it that, I think that it's through time and through testing that you become more confident that that's a true belief, or that it's actual accurate knowledge of the way reality is. And so becoming confident that you know the truth, belief, knowledge, these are different degrees of certainty. And I think we always need to hold our beliefs and our knowledge with a certain amount of humility, with a sense of, well, I think to the best of my ability and the best of my exploration and the best of my study that this is true. But I realize that I'm finite and that I may not have all of the knowledge that I need to make a definitive statement. But I believe there is such a thing as absolute truth. I don't think that we have unhindered access to that, but I do think that we can, through study and inquiry and gathering evidence and making logical and rational judgments, that we can reach an understanding of objective truths, and that objective truths are something that another rational person would agree with us on. So.
Would you agree with the statement that science is not the truth, it's an approximation to the truth, and it will always be revised?
I prefer to define truth as a coherent correspondence to reality. And that's a leading theory in philosophy, epistemology. And so I'm of the belief that there's a consistency between these books. There's a book of nature, and there's a book called Scripture that's a revelation from God. And so the author of, there's one author for both books, so to speak, and they are consistent with one another whether or not I recognize the consistency. And since all of my knowledge is provisional, my knowledge of nature, my knowledge of revelation, I have to be very careful. I have to be humble and not make myself a bigger deal than I really am. And in fact, I would say one rule is that however big a deal I think I am, I'm far less than that. You know, and if everybody thought this way, I think we'd have a much more peaceful discourse with whoever, for whatever reasons.
In my understanding, P-prims are phenomenological primitives. And when I first interviewed one of the astronomers, actually here on campus even, he was interested in some research that was being done by the National Science Foundation. And it's difficult to teach physics, science, and some of those courses that require you to really think beyond yourself. And the phenomenological primitives are sort of portions of our thought process that cause us to have misconceptions about things. And so I was wondering, does the amygdala have anything to do with that, or is that an ancient part of our brain, or is that learned? Is it DNA, or how do we account for that?
I think we have a propensity to attribute a phenomenon that we observe to a cause, and usually to a unique cause. And that is adaptive because we needed to make sense of our environment. We needed to make sense about the cause, effect, and the lawful relationship between events in our environment. That gets us into trouble because we cannot keep track. We can keep track of maybe 2 or 3 processes that are interacting and ongoing in the same time. But our mind is not very good at going and zooming out and keeping track of numerous processes going on at the same time. So we are unable to distribute the causality. And we are also very, very poor at understanding chance and probability. Mm-hmm. So we cram into the framework of a cause and effect phenomena that should not be crammed into this very simplistic framework. Mm-hmm. This is where our thinking, our sort of natural propensity of thinking is going to fail us. And this is what you have to sort of unlearn to be a scientist, to sort of give chance, probability, and also the idea that there are situations when from utter disorganization and chaos, something patterned, regular, and lawful might emerge. So things are deterministic, but they're not predictable. So that concept is actually really hard to make it yours, your own, to understand that something is lawful, something is very, very strongly predicted by the laws that govern a particular phenomenon, but punctate predictability, exactly what causes this, it's beyond of our ability to understand.
In education theory, there's an idea called a prim, which is a primitive construct that you might have, and people try and use this in the field of science education because it might be something like when something is closer, it's brighter, and when it's farther away, it's dimmer. When it's closer, it's hotter, and it's far away, it's cooler. So we have these sort of little correlations that are built into our thinking about what are essentially physical ideas based on, for natural reasons and survival as well. But some of those prims are actually, become unphysical. I mean, they're not based on they can be misleading or wrong. So there's some research about that which shows that you can have a set of sort of correlations observed in an unscientific way, some of which map into a scientific idea, and some of which don't, some of which are actually wrong. The other thing I think that goes on, which is clear, is that humans, partly from our visual sense, we're pattern recognizers. We have to make sense of the world, we order the world, and we use visual sense primarily for that. But our brain is always filtering and looking for patterns of behavior, patterns in the natural world. And of course, the brain is tuned by natural selection to do that job really well, and it can do it too well. And so this confusion of correlation and causation, which leads to sort of unphysical ideas or pseudoscientific ideas, or the inference of an effect, causation where none exists, or phenomena even where none exists, is a simple result, I think, of this sort of highly tuned brain looking for patterns that aren't there.
Yeah.
And there's an obvious reason. If you see the pattern in the dappled grass and you think there's a leopard and you just run away and you're wrong, well, you just got tired. If you get it the other way around, you got eaten. So there's a very strong reason for the brain to overinterpret data and look for patterns that might not be there. And I think not all, but some of the pseudoscientific constructs are a result of that.
Okay, let's take a minute to recap what we know so far. We believe there's a thought monopoly at work in the United States that is actively promoting their version of truth. We have chosen a PBS interview with Professor E.O. Wilson to illustrate how rhetoric is used to advance their agenda. By using hyperbole, Wilson made a dreadful prophecy. Culture wars and metaphysical differences are destroying our planet. We gathered opinions from culturally diverse students, adults, and scholars. Instead of culture wars and metaphysical differences, we are discovering that ideological differences may be the most destructive. Postmodernism appears to be the most popular ideology in our governmental, mainstream media, and educational institutions. Our perceptions of truth and reality can be clouded by misconceptions. Our next area of investigation will focus on worldviews. So, what is a worldview?
According to the American Scientific Affiliation, a worldview is a theory of the world used for living in the world. It is a mental model of reality, a framework of ideas and attitudes about the world, ourselves, and life. It is a comprehensive system of beliefs.
Admittedly, Professor Wilson and I have different views of reality. Does that mean I'm wrong or not as smart as Dr. Wilson? No, that just means we have different worldviews. If my worldview requires more than scientific materialism to explain reality, then logically my beliefs cannot align with Dr. Wilson's and those who share his belief system. Let's take a look at some results of belief in scientific materialism. Now here's our logic. Go back with us to the year 1970. Richard Nixon was president. Our troops were fighting communism in Cambodia. And the hit song on the radio was American Woman by Guess Who. But perhaps the most significant event worldwide was the launch of a massive doomsday appeal. Unknown to most of us, a powerful cabal emerged. It infiltrated public education, created 46 new government agencies, and convinced media to promote a global agenda.
In part 1, we examined the behaviors, rhetoric, and propaganda used by the thought monopoly to advance postmodernism. They are using media, government, and our education system to shape our personal beliefs to fit their ideology. In part 2, you will learn to identify specific effects of their efforts on our society. I'm John Jones. See you next time on The Thought Monopoly.